I've waited 37 years to tell this story, to develop the skills to give it the honor it deserves. My skills are still not good enough to honor this story properly, but I'm done waiting. My name is Daniel Press. I've learned a lot in my journey through life. Here I share those lessons to my younger self, lessons that would have made life easier. This is the story of Joe Delaney, who lies beneath a gravestone with the words carved into it, "Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for another." This is the story of a boy who had nothing and wanted only two things: to be good and to play professional football. He became a man who had everything and traded it all for something he valued even more. It's the story of a man that people hold so much reverence for how he died and how he lived, that nearly 40 years after his death, mention of his name still causes even hardened, rough men to cry. The day Joe Delaney died began in a way that haunts his wife still. It began in a way that has not eased its grip from around her heart and never will. He was the star of the Kansas City Chiefs professional football team. It was the off-season. In 6 more days, he would begin his 3rd year. In the early morning of that day, he was leaving the house to promote the opening of Chenault Park in Monroe, Louisiana. It was a Kids' Day event near the town where he lived. He kissed his wife and daughters goodbye, then left. And a few minutes later, he ran back inside and hugged and kissed his wife and daughters again and told them goodbye again. Again and again, he left and returned and hugged and kissed his family goodbye, as if he knew. As if he knew the moment that he was born for, the situation he unknowingly had spent his lifetime developing his mind and strengthening his body to face, was waiting for him just a few hours away. He loved only one thing in the world, and nobody has ever loved anything more, and that was his family. His wife Carolyn and 3 daughters, Tamika, who was 7, Crystal, who was 4, and Joanna, who was 4 months. He was always kissing and hugging them. On that morning, he ran back inside one final time and asked Carolyn if his 2 oldest could go with him to the event while she took care of their 4-month-old. But she said they would just get in his way. She remembers he just lingered. He didn't want to leave them that day. He asked his daughters what they wanted to do when he got back. His oldest said to him, "You always do what we want. Today, let's do what you want." He shook his head. "I live for you all. I live for you all." He had never cashed a check himself in his life, not even one time. He handed every check to his wife and told her it's hers. "If you just give me a little change to put in my pocket," he would say. "So if I want to go to the store and get a Coke, then I'm happy with that. You just take care of you and the girls." He never even made a Christmas list. When he married his wife, he could only afford a tiny ring, and he always felt ashamed of that. But now that he made it in the pros, he became a superstar. He told her he wanted to get rid of that ring and buy her a big fancy one. She only wanted that ring. So they decided they would add stones to it. He put it on a chain around his neck so he would remember. But he found that he loved the feeling of her ring close to his heart, and he never took it off. He kissed his wife and kids more that morning, and he was going to be late for the event. "You better get on now," Carolyn said. He kissed and hugged his daughters and his wife some more, and as he turned and left, his wife remembers the light shining off that ring around his neck, making it glow. Joe Delaney went out the door and left, and his wife and daughters waited, hoping he would come back to hug and kiss them just one more time. This is the handout from the event at the park. Thousands of people attended. He signed autographs beneath the hot sun, and at 2 p.m. he had a break and found a shady tree to sit beneath. The tree had a view of a pond with hundreds of people sitting around it. It looked like a pond, but it was a construction pit dug out to create the park, filled with rainwater and big sharp rocks. The edge of the pit was ankle deep, but just a few feet from the edge, there was an invisible cliff that dropped off 20 feet down. Signs around it warned of the danger within. Swimming was forbidden. It should have been fenced off. It wasn't. Three little boys were walking towards the water. Two were brothers, Harry, 11, and Lee Markets, 10, and their cousin Lancer, 11. Harry, the older brother, was quiet and respectful. He was their mother's favorite. He was everyone's favorite. He didn't like water. Lee Markets was a wild one, always getting into trouble. He was brash and had the confidence of a young brother when the oldest paves the way and protects him from life's consequences. He was always jumping into water, and he loved swimming. He and his big brother were inseparable. He was at the age where the dynamic was beginning to change a little, where in a way he, with his strong personality, was becoming the big brother, watching over his quiet, shy older brother, ready to protect him. They walked by the tree where Joe Delaney sat. He warned them not to go into the water. Harry saw the no swimming sign and felt the same. But then he looked at his little brother, Lee Markets, and didn't want to disappoint him. So he decided they would just go in a little and stay within a few feet of the edge. As the boys walked past, Joe Delaney rested his head against the tree. He closed his eyes and remembered being their age. He remembered how poor he was, the sixth of 9 siblings. They only had a few sets of clothes between them. Nobody had their own. He was kind-hearted and quiet, and he was the good and responsible one. When the neighborhood kids were playing and it reached the time their parents told them to be home, he was the one always to pick up the ball and tell everyone it's time to go. He was small, but when the kids were bullied, he was the one who stood up for them. When they were made fun of, he was the one who took them aside and talked to them and made them feel better about themselves. And when the neighborhood kids played kickball, he was a show-off. He could run faster than anybody. He would challenge them to races and contests, which he always won. Nobody knew why he was such a show-off only with the neighborhood kids, until he grew up and one day surprised everybody by announcing he was marrying Carolyn, one of the neighborhood girls who used to play with him. They had known each other since they were 7, and nobody ever knew he liked her. Leaning against that tree in the park, he thought about how, ever since he was about the age of those boys, he told everybody he was going to be a professional football player. He was going to make money so his family could have a different life. But his father wouldn't let him play. His father was a hard worker and didn't want him playing a game when there were so many chores to be done. Joe always did the physically hardest chores, hauling hay, cutting and bagging grass, and that work strengthened his body every day. When high school began, he knocked on the football coach's door. The coaches were in a meeting and asked what he wanted. He swallowed, then looked them in the eye and said he wanted to be on the team. The coaches looked him up and down. "You're too small," one of them said. "You'll just get hurt." When they saw his disappointment, they told him he could be the manager, He could travel with the team and feel like a part of it. They remembered tears filling his eyes until they slowly rolled down his cheeks. He just stood there looking at them. "One day I'm going to play in the pros," he told them, and he asked them to just give him one chance to show how he could help the team. They had never seen a kid want to play that badly. "We'll give you one chance to show what you can do," the head coach finally said. "And you better not get hurt." Joe Delaney went to that first practice and shocked the coaches with his talent. Even at that age, he had speed and acceleration none of them had seen before. After just one step, he was at full speed. Nobody could touch him. When he told his brothers and sisters that he made the team, they divided up all his chores and did them for him each day so that he could attend practice. As he sat against that tree at Chenault Park in the final minutes of his life, Joe Delaney thought about how much he loved his nearby town of Houghton, Louisiana. The whole town was not more than a few streets long. It was home to good, humble people, where everyone was considered family. Everybody watched out for each other. Everyone took care of each other, the way it's supposed to be. Even after he became wealthy and famous, he continued to live there. He wasn't comfortable anywhere else. Houghton was home. During the professional football season, he was always a center of attention, always interviewed, and nobody could understand him. He talked fast and had a heavy Southern accent, and had different values than the other athletes. But when he was back home, everybody understood him just fine, what he said and what he did. He was a star athlete among the best of the best, yet he would go home to mow the lawn of an elderly neighbor and get them groceries. He would always wear just a t-shirt and jeans, but he would buy fancy shoes and clothes for neighbors who couldn't afford them. He bought uniforms and weights for the kids at Houghton High School. He paid the electric bills of neighbors who couldn't. He couldn't believe his life had turned out so good that he was able to do those things to help. People always told him he's the happiest person they've ever met. He thought about the upcoming football season, just a few days away, and of being back with his teammates. His first year, his rookie year, he shocked the whole league. He set records that lasted for the next 20 years without being broken. He was playing against the best, the toughest, the fastest football players, yet even among them, he had the rarest kind of speed and acceleration and toughness. He won award after award. His second year was cut short because the players went on strike, and he had a torn retina that required eye surgery. He was healing and was instructed to do nothing that could damage his body, to take no risks. He was about to sign a new contract that would ensure his family would have everything they ever needed for generations to come. He couldn't wait to hand those bigger checks to his wife for her and his daughters. His position on the team was running back, the most dangerous and damaging position. It's the position with the shortest careers, devastating injuries, and the emotional shrapnel of being the target of the whole other team usually force running backs out of the sport after an average of 2 years. If you don't know football, he is the person they give the ball to. His job is to run with the ball as far forward as he can, while all the people on the other team are paid to smash him to the ground and stop him from moving forward. He was 5'10" and 185 pounds, which is tiny compared to the 6'6", 300-pound men he was playing against. I have a friend who played exactly one play at just a practice in the National Football League. He weighed 285 pounds of muscle, and he was the fastest person I knew, even at that huge size. In his one play, his arm was nearly torn off, and he never played again. He said he's always been the biggest, fastest, strongest person everywhere, and he learned immediately that everyone was bigger and faster and stronger and hit harder in the pros than he even knew was possible. Every single play that Joe Delaney was in was the same as being in a car crash. Every play he would get hurt. His mind would yell at him to stay down, but he always jumped right back up. He didn't want them to have the satisfaction of knowing they hurt him. Then he would charge right into the next play, knowing with 100% certainty how it's going to end, being smashed into the ground again by giants, being hurt. Most people who try that position only try it once and know it's not for them. But he trained his mind day after day, year after year, to ignore the pain and the damage that awaited him at the end of each play, to keep getting back up and launching himself right back into the fire. Resting in the shade of that tree at Chenault Park, Joe Delaney was thinking about how his every dream had come true. All the suffering, the pain, the sacrifices, the risk, ignoring all the doubters who told him he was too small, finally paid off. He had everything. He couldn't ask for even one thing more. And he just couldn't wait to go home soon and be with his family. A scream brought him back from remembering. The three boys had stepped into the water, walked out just a little way, and dropped off that invisible cliff into the dark, cold depths, then vanished beneath the surface, swallowed up as if they had never been. There were hundreds of people there, and every one of them, except for one person, screamed at the horror they were witnessing and called for help. Joe Delaney was the only person who did not say a thing, because he was already running as fast as he could run, with all his speed, into the water. He ran right over the shallow part and straight off the ledge and disappeared. The shock of the deep, murky, cold water made his body, as a reflex, exhale all the oxygen. His mind screamed at him to get out, but he kept moving forward. The deeper he went, the colder and darker it got, but the boys were so far away still, so deep down, so he kept moving forward. In that cold water, the blood rushed to his vital organs, making his strong limbs less responsive, and he began to lose coordination with his arms and legs. But still, he kept moving forward. There was not another person on the planet that day who could have gotten to those boys faster, because of his speed and because of how he had trained his mind day after day in football ever since he was a kid to shut out any thought of the damage that awaited and to put the entirety of his focus, of his strength, of his belief into moving forward, no matter what stood in his way, no matter what tried to stop him. And when his lungs felt the burn of no air and his heart felt the doubt, his mind reminded him that he's a professional athlete, that his body is capable of things nobody else can do. Somebody had to save those kids down at the bottom of that deep pit, and nobody else had stepped forward. I am the one, he said to himself over and over. I am the one. And he kept moving forward. Joe Delaney got to LeMarcus first, the little brother of Harry. LeMarcus remembers that terror he felt on the cold, dark bottom of that pit, his limbs unable to move, just waiting to die. All his breath was gone. His lungs were burning as water started filling them. He remembers looking up at the last moment of his life and seeing a man reach to him out of nowhere. Just seeing someone coming to help him made all the difference. Gave him a few more moments to fight to stay alive. He remembers the hand with the big scar on the pinky, clear as day, as it grabbed him by the shoulder. He will never forget that hand. He remembers the force with which he was pulled up out of that water, up from the depths to the shallow area, to safety, to life. He was so relieved to be out of that nightmare, and he just wanted to be as far away from it as possible. He remembers watching that man turn without even pausing and go right back in for his brother and his cousin. He remembers standing on the bank, terrified, trying to suck in as much air as he could, knowing his brother was down there dying with no air. He remembers trying as hard as he could to coax his legs to carry him back into the water, to help his brother. But his legs didn't move. He left his brother there. His brother didn't even want to go into the water. It was because of him that his brother was going to die. I just stood there, he said years later. I was so scared. He stood there and watched the surface of the water, knowing his brother was down there. That man owed nothing to Harry, and here he was owing everything to his brother. But he stood where it was safe with everybody else and just watched the surface, which remained still. And every good thing that his brother ever did for him flashed through his mind. When his brother beat up the kid who made fun of him, when his brother taught him to fish, when his brother comforted him after his mother punished him for knocking over her favorite vase and breaking it when he felt so bad. He told his legs again to move, but they didn't move. He pictured his brother floating at the bottom, with the last bit of air almost gone, terrified. But rather than go back in to help him, he was content to let his brother die. And at that moment he realized that his mother was right to have chosen Harry to be her favorite. And everyone was right when they said his brother was the good one. And that's not even the most painful of what he knew was true. What hurt him the worst was that he knew that if it was him still down there and his brother had been pulled out, it didn't matter how terrifying or cold or dark it was at the bottom of that pit. It didn't matter how scared his brother was. He knew that if it was him down there, his brother would be coming to save him. The phone rang at the Delaney's house. Carolyn answered and was told her husband was in an accident. "Is he okay? What happened?" she asked. "Just get to the hospital as fast as you can," she was told. St. Francis Medical Center was an hour away. Carolyn found her brother-in-law down the street, and he drove her that endless hour. They had never been to that hospital, and he stopped at a convenience store to get directions. Inside, he heard on the radio that the superstar Joe Delaney had died. He went back to the car and drove, and just stared straight ahead. He couldn't tell Carolyn what he heard. The words wouldn't come out. At the hospital, they put Carolyn in a room and told her the doctor would be in to see her soon. After another hour passed, she went into the hallway and found a nurse. The nurse told her that her husband had drowned around 2:30 p.m. Drowned? Immediately, she felt great relief, because she knew for a fact they had the wrong Joe Delaney. On radios around the country, people began to hear the news, and every single person who knew him, when they heard Joe Delaney drowned, they all felt that same relief, knowing with certainty that it was impossible that it was their Joe Delaney. They knew it was impossible that their Joe Delaney drowned, because their Joe Delaney did not know how to swim. More than that, he was terrified of water. The only time anybody had ever seen him scared was when he was near water. After football practices, the team would go to the pool. They would tease him about how petrified he was. He would never get close to water, never. But then the next words came from the nurse in the hospital and were spoken on the radio. After they said that Joe Delaney had drowned, they said 3 little boys were drowning. There was not another word that anybody ever heard after that. Carolyn collapsed. Friends listening to the radio felt their hearts shatter into a million little pieces. Football people who never cry, burst into uncontrollable tears because now they knew it was their Joe Delaney. A security guard handed Carolyn the necklace with her wedding ring on it. He never took that off away from his heart. She knew nobody would be able to remove it from around his neck if he was alive. Two weeks after Joe Delaney's death, Vice President George H.W. Bush visited his hometown of Houghton to present his mother and wife with the Presidential Citizens Medal and a letter from President Ronald Reagan that said, "Although there are no words to ease the pain you feel at this time, I hope you can draw comfort knowing that Joe was more concerned for the safety of others than his own. He was a true hero and has surely earned a place in heaven for having sacrificed his life for those three boys." Louisiana Governor Dave Treen awarded him the state's Civilian Bravery Award. A park in his hometown has been named for him. A monument has been created to honor him at Chenault Park, where he died. The monument reads, "Joe Delaney died on June 29, 1983, while attempting to rescue three children from drowning. He was posthumously awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal from U.S. President Ronald W. Reagan. He made the ultimate sacrifice by placing the lives of three children above regard for his own safety. By the supreme example of courage and compassion, this brilliantly gifted young man left a spiritual legacy for all fellow Americans." In 1981, he won the Rookie of the Year award. His teammates voted him their most valuable player, and he was chosen for the Pro Bowl, the All-Star game, where he started as a rookie. No Kansas City Chiefs player has worn number 37 since. The Delaney 37 Foundation was formed, a nonprofit that works with the American Red Cross to teach young children how to swim. He was buried on the 4th of July. 3,000 people attended his funeral. At his funeral, nobody cared that for a brief time, he was among the most talented football players who ever played. They cared about only one thing. They cared about his goodness. Joe Delaney died just before he was going to sign a contract for more money than he could ever imagine growing up. After his death, Carolyn focused on raising their three daughters. She took on jobs as a daycare teacher and as a driver for one of the local casinos. She had to sell their home and moved into a smaller one. There are no pictures of her husband in the new house. It would be too painful to bear. His pictures and trophies are kept in a box. She never saw her husband play football, even though she attended every one of his games. She always covered her eyes when he was on the field, scared she would see him be hurt. She wished she would have looked just once to have that memory to hold on to. Sometimes she thinks it was all a dream. Her life with him, his death, all of it. He still lives inside her. She has conversations with him in her head, knowing what he would say if he was here. And when there's something funny the grandkids do, she hears his laugh. It's been nearly 40 years, and she's been unable to touch the necklace with her ring on it. She keeps it in a music box. She wishes she could look at it, touch it, put it on her finger. She can't, not yet. Not yet. What happened to the little boy he saved? What did Lamarckitz do with the precious gift Joe Delaney gave up his life for him to have? He went to prison for drugs. The pressure of having had someone trade their life for his was too much to bear, along with losing all that was taken away from him on that day. He couldn't handle the guilt he had for surviving and of not helping his brother, just leaving him there to die. He became self-destructive as a result and gave up on himself. He said from prison, "Joe Delaney would not be too happy to see me sitting in here." Everything changed that day, Lamarckitz said. Before that day, his life had been happy and fun and safe, and he loved his big brother. They did everything together. They shared a room, and each day began and ended talking with his big brother. His mother dealt with her son's death the only way she knew, with alcohol. Constantly, she stopped taking care of Lamarckitz. He would hear people talking, saying that he wasn't worth it to have had Joe Delaney trade his life for. He agreed with his mother and others who wished his big brother was the one who had been saved instead. He was 10 years old when this was happening, and he was left alone to deal with all of it. To protect himself, he put up a wall between himself and the world. He would just stay in his room for days. He couldn't stop thinking of his big brother and of being a coward and leaving him to die. He had to find a way for the pain to stop. He thought if he erased everything about Harry, the pain would go away. So he made his mother sell all of Harry's things. He burned all Harry's clothes and told his mother that if she didn't sell his bed, he would burn it also. But watching it all leave, watching everything burn until it was dust, didn't remove his brother from his heart. It only seared the pain into it. It made the pain worse. The few times he tried to talk to his mother about his brother, she told him to shut his mouth. Every night when he would finally fall asleep, he would wake up screaming, dripping with sweat. It was always the same. He would see the hand with the scar on the pinky saving him, pulling him up from the bottom of the water. But he didn't want to go. He wanted to stay with his brother. And he was screaming and screaming to stay with him. But all he could do was look down at Harry and see him getting further and further away. He had been a happy-go-lucky kid, but since that day he caused trouble in school and got into fights and kept being suspended. When the teacher told his mother that he needed counseling for this, his mother said, "All he needs is a whipping." And I can imagine her releasing all her pain and sadness and loss with that belt against him. And nobody was going to stop her until she was too tired. Lamarckitz hates when his mind thinks back to Harry's funeral. He wishes he could stop his mind from ever thinking about it. He remembers how it felt to stare at his brother's body, knowing Harry was in the coffin because of him. He couldn't get the tears to stop. He didn't even know he had so many tears. After the ceremony, Lamarckitz did not go to the gravesite. He sat alone in the car while his big brother was buried. "I could not stand to look at them sticking Harry in no hole," he said. Lamarckitz looks back over his life with regret and with shame and with sadness. He can't believe Harry has been gone all these years, that he was only a little kid the last time he saw his brother. He feels like he is stuck in time, stuck at the worst moment of his life. Not when he was trapped at the bottom of that pit with all his air gone, knowing he was about to die, but after, when he was back on land, looking at the calm surface, knowing his brother is below, wanting to help him, and not being able to get his feet to move. If only Harry was still here, he says to himself. He's said it through the years, over and over, since that day. He'll say those words for the rest of his life. It's the only thing that comforts him. He already knows when he's an old man, those words will be his final words. That he knows. I don't believe the bravest part of what Joe Delaney did that day was racing into the water when nobody else would, even though he didn't know how to swim. And I don't believe saving the life of that child he rescued is the moment he was born for. It was something even bigger. Because other people could have pulled the first child out. They didn't, but it would have been possible. But who else, after feeling the terror of being in the cold darkness at the bottom of that pit, after barely making it out through sheer determination, after getting that child to safety and knowing he was safe himself, after knowing he had done something great, that he had already done more than enough, more than could have been asked of him, knowing he could have stopped right then as a hero and had an amazing life with everything, who else would have made the decision to turn around and go back in to be with those two children he didn't even know, so they wouldn't die alone? The two children Joe Delaney could not save, he saved them too, because there's all the difference in the world between dying at the bottom of a dark, cold pit alone and being stuck at the bottom of a dark, cold pit and seeing someone coming to you, knowing in your final moment that you're cared about. That difference that he made to those little boys, turning their terror into peace when they needed it more than anybody has ever needed anything, that is the moment Joe Delaney was born to fulfill. That only he could have done. That moment is what he had trained his mind and his body to do all those years in football, to jump right back to his feet after he was knocked down and hurt and scared, and to charge straight back into the storm, disregarding the danger and the damage that awaited, disregarding the fear, just focusing on moving forward. Joe Delaney had everything: wealth, fame, a loving family, admiration, his dream life, and he traded it all for something that was of even greater value to him than everything he had. What he traded it all for, what was of even greater value to him, was making sure the last thing Harry and Lancer felt was not the cold, frightening loneliness at the bottom of that pit. It was the warmth of a hand with a scar on the pinky. It was being loved. There are two questions I've thought about for 37 years since this happened. The first is, did he make the right decision to try to rescue those two children, as so much extra pain came out of this? He lost his life for strangers. It devastated his family, emotionally and financially. What he loved most, what he would protect above all else, the one thing he would never hurt, the boy whose life he saved lived an excruciating life since that day and made the world a worse place by dealing drugs. Then there's the police diver who brought Lancer and Harry and Joe Delaney out of that water. He suffered anguish every day since. His name is Marvin Dearman. In the chaos of that moment, after he pulled the two boys out, he took off his gear until someone said there's another person in there. Then he put his gear back on and went back in. When he pulled Joe Delaney out, he was still alive. He did CPR as hard as he could, but Joe Delaney died under his care. To this day, that diver does not understand how he didn't know there was the third person in the water. He thinks about it over and over. He fights to go back in time to undo it and do it again. He wonders, was he told of the third person in the water? And did he let the shock of seeing the dead children overwhelm him, and he forgot? Was he informed, but he wasn't paying attention and didn't hear? Joe Delaney was still alive, even after all that time. If he had just known he was there and pulled him out right away, would Joe Delaney be alive today? If he had done CPR somehow better, would Joe Delaney have survived? For 4 decades, he's carried that feeling of guilt around inside him. Nobody else feels he let them down, and Joe Delaney's family has become close with him. But every night since then, when he's alone in the darkness, he sees Joe Delaney, and he tells him, "I'm sorry." With all those outcomes, did Joe Delaney make the right decision to try to rescue those little boys? Everyone who knew Joe Delaney said if he did not jump in to try to help those kids, he would not have been Joe Delaney. And everyone says he would have done it again every time. About them being strangers, he didn't know them, but they were not strangers. To Joe Delaney, nobody was a stranger in that community. He knew everyone shared the same hopes, the same fears, the same worries. When you share all that, you're family. And what about the hurt he left his family with? He had given his family strength, and he had given his family courage, and he had given his family the toughness to continue without him. His family had each other. Those two boys needed him in their final moment that they were not equipped to handle alone. And at that moment in time, only he could have found the way to be there for them. They needed him more than his family did. As his sister said, if he had not done everything he could have to save those kids, that would have been the end of him. The rest of his life would not have been livable. Did he make the right decision? This is what I've come to. There was no decision to be made. Just leaving those children there to die without trying his best, for Joe Delaney, that was not an option. So there was no decision to be made. The second question I've wrestled with long and hard. And I imagine you and everyone who has heard Joe Delaney's story has done the same. If I had been at that park that day, if I didn't know how to swim, I was terrified of water, and those 3 children were drowning, and nobody else was doing anything but yelling for help, and time was running out on those children's lives, what would I have done? Our minds have evolved over millions of years to keep us alive. Would I have overcome that instinct for self-preservation that's programmed into us and have helped them after all these years of considering it. The answer I have come up with, that I have complete certainty is the right answer, is to never let myself or anyone I know be in that situation. The answer is to make sure I and those close to me know how to swim. I'm trained in swiftwater river rescue. I've been privileged to have helped people struggling in the water make it out safely. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to have taught people with extreme water phobias to swim. People who would shake violently when I would simply open the door to the indoor pool. Now, they not only love water, but they've gone on and taught others to swim. Make sure your loved ones know how to swim. Don't just tell a loved one to learn to swim. That's completely valueless. Find lessons for them, then take them to the lesson and be there with them. And if you don't know how to swim, and your solution is you'll simply stay far away from water, Joe Delaney knew only one thing for certain in his life. He knew that he would never be going into water because he always stayed far away. You don't know when you'll end up in water to save your own life or to save somebody else's. What a final day of life to have had. To have hugged and kissed the people he loved most over and over. And to have come back for bonus hugs and kisses after he should have already left. Hugs and kisses to last him forever. Then to have gone to an event to better a community that he loved. And there to sign autographs being adored and admired and respected for being the exact kind of football superstar he dreamed of being when he was a little kid. Then to have faced and overcome his only fear. To have stepped forward and taken action when a hero was needed and nobody else stepped forward. To have saved a child's life. To have provided comfort to two terrified children when nobody else could when they needed it most. All his life he asked why. Why was he given so many gifts? In his final moment, he learned the answer. We all doubt that when the moment we were born for arrives, will we be up to it? He learned that answer too. Joe Delaney was once a little boy who only wanted two things: to be good and to play professional football with greatness. And in his final moment, he knew that not only was he a great football player, but that he was good. The man who has lived the most is not he who has counted the most years, but he who has most felt life. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. My name is Daniel Press. We'll talk again.